I had met Ben Gunn, one of Flint's crew who'd been marooned on Treasure Island. In his time alone, he'd repented his pirate life and was now prepared to help us in our struggle against the mutineers. They had mounted an attack on the blockhouse in which 8 men had fallen. Now only 3 still breathed. One of the pirates, Hunter, and Captain Smollett, and of these the first 2 died before the day was out. As for the captain, his wounds were grievous indeed, but not dangerous. There was no return of the mutineers, and we had a quiet time to overhaul the wounded and get dinner. After we'd eaten, the squire and the doctor sat by the captain's side a while in consultation. Then, taking the chart and a musket over his shoulder, the doctor crossed the palisade and set off briskly through the trees. I surmised that he was going to see Ben Gunn. With the heat and the blood, a disgust of fear of the place began to grow in me. This, with a desire to do something, led me to take some biscuit and a brace of pistols. I set out to find again the White Rock and ascertain whether Ben Gunn had hidden his boat there. I slipped out when nobody was watching, and that was so bad a way of doing it as made the thing itself wrong. I was unthinkingly leaving but 2 sound men to guard the house. I crept warily up to the ridge of the spit and was in time to see one of the gigs with Silver and his parrot in the stern shoving off from the Hispaniola, the 2 remaining men going below. I saw I must lose no time if I were to find Ben Gunn's boat that evening. It was well hidden in a little tent of goatskins at the foot of the White Rock. There was a paddle for propulsion, and it was like the first and worst coracle ever made by man. I had begun to take another notion, and this was to cut the Hispaniola adrift. This would, I decided, prevent the mutineers from upping the anchor and sailing off. Turning round and round was the manoeuvre the coracle was best at. I never should have made the ship at all, but for the tide. As I cut through the Hispaniola's hawser with my sea knife, I could hear the sound of loud voices from the cabin. One I recognized for the coxswain's Israel hands. Both men were plainly the worse for drink. With a good, tough effort, I cut the last fibers of the hawser through. The Hispaniola began to turn, spinning slowly across the current. As I shoved myself clear, my hands came across a light cord that was trailing overboard across the stern. I pulled in, hand over hand, and rose at infinite risk to peer into the cabin. One glance, however, showed me why the watchman had taken no alarm. Hans and his companion were locked together in deadly wrestle. I dropped back into the coracle none too soon, for I was near overboard. Just then, with a sudden lurch, we seemed to change course, spinning southward through the Narrows for the open sea. Suddenly, one shout followed another, and I knew that the 2 drunkards were aware of their disaster. As for me, notwithstanding my fear of the wretched coracle being swamped among the barraging breakers, a numbness fell upon my mind until I slept. It was broad day when I awoke, and found myself scarce a quarter of a mile to seaward of the rocky shore and the breakers. There I dared not land, and continued to drift north with the current. After a little while I sat up to try my skill at paddling. In spite of a drenching or 2, I learned to guide the coracle through the smooth places between each wave. Just as I was beginning to be tortured by thirst, the current carried me past the Cape of the Woods. There, not half a mile away, I beheld the Hispaniola under sail. As I watched, she fell right into the wind's eye and stood there a while, helpless, with her sails shivering. Either the men were dead drunk or had deserted her, I thought, and perhaps if I could get on board, I might return the vessel to her captain. With some difficulty, I came up with her and brought the coracle close under the bowsprit. I sprang to my feet, leapt, caught the jib boom, and crawled back along the bowsprit and tumbled head foremost on the deck. There were the 2 watchmen, sure enough. One on his back, as stiff as a handspike. The other, Israel Hands, was propped against the bulwarks. They had, it appeared, killed each other in their drunken wrath. Then Israel Hands, with a slow moan, turned partly round. Though I could hold no pity for this murderous man, when he asked for brandy, I lost no time in slipping down into the cabin. Foraging about, I found brandy for Hands and food and water for myself. Whilst I ate, I told him I'd come on board to reclaim the ship, and that he should regard me as the captain. In exchange for his help, he asked me to bind up his wound, a great bleeding stab in the thigh. In a brief space of time, I had lashed the tiller and tended to Hans's wound. As we turned the northern corner of the island, the wind, serving us well, now hauled into the west. The coxswain, picking up visibly, craftily, watched me at my work. Whilst we waited for the tide to be favourable, he gave me more instruction, and then he asked me to fetch him a bottle of wine from the cabin, saying, "This brandy's too strong for my head, Jim." Why he'd wanted me to leave the deck, I could in no way imagine. However, I scuttled down the companion, ran quietly to the forecastle ladder, and popped my head out of the fore companion. Though his leg obviously hurt him pretty sharply, yet he trailed himself across the deck and picked, out of a coil of rope, a long knife, or rather a short dirk, which he hastily concealed under his jacket. Israel was now armed. But until the schooner was safely hidden, I considered that my life would certainly be spared. Quickly now, I laid my hand on a bottle of wine and made my reappearance on the deck. Hans lay as I had left him. He took a good swig from the bottle, then he said the tide was now right for us. The navigation was delicate, but Hans was an excellent pilot. He issued his commands till all of a sudden he cried, "Now, me hearty, luff!" And I put the helm hard up, and the Hispaniola ran stem on for the low wooded shore. When I looked round, there was Hans with the dirk in his right hand. As our eyes met, he threw himself forward, and I leapt sideways, leaving hold of the tiller. It sprang sharp to leeward and struck Hans across the chest. The Hispaniola struck, staggered, and then canted over to the port side. Both of us rolled almost together into the scuppers. Quick as thought, I sprang into the mizzen shrouds and didn't draw a breath till I was seated on the cross trees of the mast. Hans, with the dirk in his teeth, began slowly and painfully to mount. I had drawn my pistols before he was much more than a third of the way up. "One more step, Mr. Hans," said I, "and I'll blow your brains out." He stopped instantly, trying to think. He spoke, taking the dagger from his mouth. "Jim, I reckon we're fouled, you and me, and we'll have to sign articles." And back went his right hand. Something sang like an arrow through the air. I felt a blow, and there I was, pinned by the shoulder to the mast. In the horrid surprise of the moment, both my pistols went off and both escaped out of my hands. With a choked cry, the coxswain plunged head first into the water, for we'd had nothing below us but the surface of the bay. As the water settled, I could see him lying huddled on the clean, bright sand. I began to feel sick, faint, and terrified. The dirk seemed to burn like a hot iron, but it held me by a mere pinch of skin. Quickly, I was free and had regained the deck by the starboard shrouds. After I had tended my wound, I went back on deck and tumbled the dead man, O'Brien, overboard. As soon as the splash subsided, I could see him and Israel lying side by side, the quick fishes steering to and fro over both. By this time, the whole anchorage had fallen into shadow. Remembering my way from my studies of the treasure map, I now set off for the stockade, but not before I'd cut loose the mainsail and lowered the jibsails. When I reached the clearing, there was not a soul stirring, and I began to fear that something had gone wrong. An immense fire had burned itself into clear embers and shed a steady red light. All was dark within the blockhouse, but there was the deadly drone of the snorers and a small occasional noise of flickering or pecking that I could not account for. And then, all of a sudden, a shrill voice broke forth out of the darkness. "Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8!" It was Silver's green parrot, Captain Flint. The sleepers awoke and sprang up. I turned and ran full into the arms of a sailor who held me tight. Silver called for a torch, and one of the men brought in a lighted brand. There was not a sign of any prisoner, but there were 6 of the buccaneers. 5 of them were on their feet. The 6th had a blood-stained bandage round his head. The parrot sat on Long John's shoulder. "So," the sea cook said, "here's Jim Hawkins, shiver my timbers. Dropped in like, eh?" And thereupon he sat down across the brandy cask. "Now, Jim, I'll give you a piece of my mind. I've always liked you, I have. I always wanted you to join and take your share. And now, you've got to." He told me Captain Smollett and the doctor wanted nothing more to do with me, thinking I had deserted them. "Yesterday morning, Mr. Hawkins," said Silver, "down come Dr. Livesey with a flag of truce. Says he, 'Captain Silver, you're sold out. Ship's gone.' Well, I never seen a pack of fools look fishier, and I tells you that look the fishiest. Well, says the doctor, let's bargain. How many are you, says I, to leave? 4, says he, and one of us wounded. And as for that boy, I don't know where he is, confound him, nor I don't much care. These was his words. And then Silver bade me choose. But I told them it was I who'd thwarted their plan of mutiny and had cut the ship's cable. Kill me if you please, but if you spare me, when you fellows are in court for piracy, I'll save you all I can. It's for you to choose. At that, an old sailor, Morgan by name, sprang up, drawing his knife. "Avast there!" cried Silver. "Maybe you thought you was captain here, Tom Morgan. By the powers, I'll teach you better." Morgan paused, but a hoarse murmur rose from the others. "I'm captain here by election," roared Silver. "I'm captain here because I'm the best man by a long sea mile. You'll obey, and you may lay to it." There was a long pause after this. Then Silver's unruly followers demanded their right to talk together and went outside, leaving me with the sea cook. "Now you look here, Jim Hawkins," he whispered. "You're within half a plank of death and of torture. They're gonna throw me off, that's the size of it. I'll save your life from them, if so be as I can. But see here, Jim, tit for tat. You save Long John from swinging." "What I can do, that I'll do," I agreed. "Then, by thunder," said Long John, "I've a chance. Understand me, Jim. I'm on Squire's side now. I know when a game's up, I do." Then he demanded to know why the doctor had given him the treasure map. Silver could see my wonder. "Ah, well, he did, though," said he. "And there's something under that, Jim. Bad or good."